Hello, good morning. So, this is a tutorial where I teach you, or I try, at least I try to teach you Java based on my learnings. So, I just learned Java 5 days ago and I have found some materials. So, note that this tutorial is not for all. This tutorial is just me trying to teach others that don't know the code based on my understanding. And this method of teaching is also helping me learn, since I learn better when I teach them, or when I express them for something. So let's start off knowing why we code. We code because we want to make something. So I code because I want to make something. And the first thing you need to know in Java is variables. What are variables? So in algebra, variables are values or anything basically that changes in value. So an example of a variable is temperature. So temperature has a value that can vary. So variables are any value that can vary. So temperature. So temperature can vary into negative temperatures, which tends to be colder because they have less energy, and positive temperatures, which tends to be warmer because they have more energy. So let's give an example of a variable that is temperature. So 32 degrees, gotta look at that too. 32 degrees Celsius. So that is a temperature. So of course, a variable doesn't always mean any integer, which is a number. So a variable can be an expression like weather. So a weather can be sunny, it can be cloudy, it can be rainy. You get the point. Delete. So let's continue. So there are ways to store variables or data in Java. So namely, a byte, short, int, long, float, double, char, or boolean. So each of these commands store different types of data, which are primitive data types in Java. So a primitive data type is basically any value that is that can be contained in a range, within a range. So a byte, I believe, contains negative 128 up to positive 127. So if your data is within that range, you can use a byte. But we tend to use integers since they can store up to negative just below 2 billion and positive just above 2 billion, or about 2 billion. The long is a type is a command that stores 8 bytes. So it can store up to just below 4 quintillion, just below negative 4 quintillion, and just below positive 4 quintillion. So that's a huge amount of data that can be stored in that command. So to store data, let me show you. So let's say I want to store a character. So a character, this char command basically lets you store numbers. So you cannot store letters. My bad. So a char command lets you store letters or any character or any syntax that is considered a char. So you cannot store any letters in an int because it only stores numbers within a range. So let me show you. So integer x. So let's name our integer x equals. I need a new keyboard. So let's just say 3. So I declare my integer as 3. Let's just fix. So I declare my integer as 3. So x is equal to 3. Then, of course, in Java, we need to see if our command is working. So an easy way to show that your command is working is typing system out. Can I spell? System dot out dot print You can choose print since it can store integers. So print x. So there you go. Let's try to run this command. Let's try to run this code. Okay, it's loading. So see, I got an output of 3. So I can change this to 4. Oh my god. Okay, I can change this to 4. And see, the output is 4. So let's store a character. So char, then let's name this y, and statement. So in Java we use semicolons to end statements. So I state that an integer which I name x, so an integer which I name x is equals to 4. Then we end statements in Java using semicolon. So I declare a character that I name y, which is stored in single quotes. So we store characters in single quotes. So any characters that you have to store or you need to note, they are stored in single quotes. So h, since my first name start with h, and we need some output that can tell us that our code is working. So go. So what I just did is a shortcut. So it's a feature in IntelliJ, a program that I use. South, or I think it is available in any program. So it depends on what program you use. When I input south, it automatically types out a command or a function that I want to use. So in this case, I use system out print line, since it prints an integer or something, or it prints something. There you go. So as you can see, it printed my y, which is equals to h. That stores a character. Okay. Let's try a binary. Okay, let's try storing a binary value. So a binary value basically means you only have 2 values. You can choose between 2 of them. So a boolean is a command or function that only stores false and true value. So they only consume 1 bit of memory, and they only store boolean values. Okay, let's go back to IntelliJ and let's type boolean. Let's declare a boolean. We name it z, I guess. Then in here we store any boolean value. For example, true. So I declared something, so I need to type it out, or I need to output it with something. So z. So this is how it reads the command. So this command runs and it prints what is z. So z, as I declared, is a boolean value which has the value of true. True. Yeah. Let's just use z because what I named my variable. And let's press another command. As you can see, it printed out what is inside z, which is the value of true. I can change this into false, and it will print out false. See? Now let's try adding a float value and a double value. So a float value stores any integer, so it basically the same as an integer, but it has a special property of storing decimals, and double stores decimals that are more accurate. So let me show you how that means and how it works. So let's say we need to store a float, if I can spell right, and we name it t. equals an end statement. So we store a float that is named t, value of 3.00001. So there you go. A float can store up to 6 decimals. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 6 decimals of data. So it is accurate enough to store 3.0000001 or any value that you want to put in there to, and then let's print it out. So t. So let's output t, which is 3.0000001. And in floats, we precede the value with an f to signify that it's a float. Otherwise, you'll get an error that is cast to float, where it's still a float value, but it is considered a double value since the computer doesn't know what it is. So we need to signify a float value with an f, or we need to precede it with an f. So there you go. Then a double function is basically the same as a float, but it is more accurate because let's store it with like t equals 3. It stores more decimals basically, so it's more accurate. You can store pi in this, pi, and it's 13th decimal. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So this is a float value. Let's put this as 1. It's a sorry, my bad. This is a double value. So let's print it out. South D. So there you go. So you see why this is more accurate and more convenient to use, because you don't precede the value with an F or a character, because a double is basically a number with decimals on it. So 13 decimals to be precise. Let's run the code. It should output this thing and this thing, which is a float value and a double value. So the main difference between the two is the one's more accurate and the one's let's say you can use float, but I prefer using double since it stores more values, or it is more accurate. A float is a value that consumes less memory and faster to load. So if your value is within this range, you can use float, but note that you need to precede it with an F, or else you need to cast float. So casting is a topic that I'd like to discuss. I learned it. I'd like to discuss it in the future. So now these are primitive type values, so meaning these values are primitive and they are addressed, or they are set in a specific value. But let's say you want to store a data, which is a word. So we use a string command to store the data, which is not a primitive data type. It is a reference data type which stores an address. So I don't know what it means. Maybe you can put it in the comments below. But only know that string function stores addresses. So it's strings. So in reference type data, we use capital letters at the start, and in primitive data types, we use small letters at the start. So string, let's name it name. So equals and statement. Oh my god, my keyboard. So equals and statement, and we store the value here. So when it comes to words and or sentences, we store them in double brackets, and when it comes to H, we store them in single brackets. So let's say I want to store a name, which is Java. So course we need to output it. Name. There you go. Let's delete this since we're done with this code. Print. So see, it printed the word Java, which is name, and which is a string. So a string named Java. So you can do all sorts of things with string because it stores a reference type data. So let's see, we need to output a name, other name, such as Python. Then it should output what is inside name, which is Python. See, it changed. So again, if you enjoy this video, leave a like, share it, subscribe, and comment down below what are my errors and how can I improve as a teacher, or how can I improve as a coder. Thanks for watching.